Hey everybody, I want to tell you a little bit of what's on my mind tonight. And what's on my mind is the guy you're seeing there, Senator Joe Biden. Now, you're all familiar with Biden. He's been in the news quite a bit lately. He's out in Iowa this week trying to get the endorsement of unions out there. Now, Biden has an advantage in that respect because he's been long associated with being a strong union supporter, going for the working man, feeling his pain, as Mr. Clinton once said. However, there's also something else he's in the news for now lately, and that involves his son, Hunter, who had a nice, posh position on a Ukrainian company board, making $50,000 a month or more, according to some estimates. Merely for being positioned on the board, he came there with no experience in the energy business, which Burisma was involved in. That's the company he was attached to. And also, not much to offer on a resume. He was drummed out of the military for cocaine use. So it's not like he was a sterling candidate for this position. Now, why was he there? Well, the Ukrainian government was trying to curry favor with the Obama administration, of which Mr. Biden was a part. He was a serving vice president at the time of that administration. And he was in Ukraine himself, demanding that a Ukrainian prosecutor be fired before the U.S. would release up to $1 billion in funding for Ukraine. Mr. Biden said that the prosecutor had to be fired because he was corrupt. Now, there was a consensus among a lot of people with their own self-interest, their own commercial interest, that this guy was corrupt. Perhaps he was, perhaps he just wasn't cooperating with them, giving them the cuts they were demanding. I don't know. But what is clear is that the son of the sitting vice president of the United States was benefiting from being put on the board of Burisma, which was the energy company there, while his father was a sitting vice president, and while the Ukrainians were trying to curry favor with the Obama administration. Now, to me, that's a clear conflict of interest. Now, the other night in Iowa, once again, there was a retired farmer with whom he had a bit of a dust-up. The farmer confronting Senator Biden on his son's position in Ukraine. One thing led to another, one word led to another, and Biden called him a damn liar, this retired farmer, for merely asking about what was going on in Ukraine. He said, your son was there making money, that reflected on you. Biden said that was all a lie. Nobody's ever said that. Nobody's ever accused him of doing anything illegal. Well, maybe officials within the Democratic camp haven't, but there have been plenty of outside observers who've said that there's always something pretty fishy going on there. What the farmer should have said, now don't forget, he was he's not just a farmer, but he's not used to making speeches or questioning officials, so he wasn't too artful about it, not very articulate. But a lot of the established professional reporters and investigative reporters that have been following Biden and others on the campaign trail should have been asking more specific questions about Hunter Biden. They've just had a few general questions, and the senator says, well, there was no proof of that, I did nothing wrong, and they let him skate on that, no further questions asked. So I have a few suggestions about which questions should be asked of him. And number one, of course, is just how did your son get his position on that Ukrainian board? And secondly, did you have anything to do with it? Did you help him in any way to get that position? Suddenly he gets a position not just in Ukraine, but also in China, with a similar situation where he's placed on a board making lots of money while his father was dealing with China. So those are the two questions there. Third question would be, when did you become aware of your son's position on these boards? That's kind of getting back to the old thing about what did the president know, and when did he know it? And fourthly, big question is, Senator Biden, did you not think that at the very least this presented an obvious and serious conflict of interest, where you were there in Ukraine representing the United States while your son was sitting on the board of a Ukrainian company, making money off of that, and a company who obviously, it seems to me, was placed on that board for the very reason that he was your son, the son of the vice president of the U.S., who could help perhaps Ukraine establish good relationships with the Obama administration. So wasn't that an obvious conflict of interest? And shouldn't you have done something about that at the time? Either pull out of your position with Ukraine and let somebody else do it, or get your son off that board. Now, Mr. Biden says, well, he didn't know what his son was doing. He learned about it late, and his hands were washed of that. But that doesn't seem likely to many critics, considering his son was involved deeply in Ukraine while the vice president was in Ukraine dealing with the Ukrainians. And of course, he was demanding that the prosecutor be fired. The prosecutor who was investigating, among other things, the very company that Biden's son was attached to, investigating that company for corruption. Now, whether the prosecutor is pointed straight or not, I think is irrelevant, because Mr. Biden publicly bragged about how he told the Ukrainians that if the prosecutor wasn't fired, within 24 hours, I think it was, he was leaving Ukraine and they would never get that money. They folded, they fired the prosecutor, and Ukraine got the money. Now, to me, this is a story that needs much more examination, and Mr. Biden shouldn't be allowed just to skate on that. Now, in terms of quid pro quo that they're going after Trump for, I agree that there may have been a quid pro quo on Trump's part with his dealings with Ukraine, but also on the part of Joe Biden, where it was clearly quid pro quo. If you don't fire the prosecutor, then you don't get the money. And his son is enriched by the prosecutor not being fired. So therefore, there was a personal gain for the vice president's family. And to me, that's quite a serious matter that is being skated over pretty much by the mainstream media. So I have a suggestion for all you listening out there. Mr. Biden, of course, is crisscrossing the country now, going to various states where the primaries are going to be held, the early primaries and the later primaries. So if he comes to your locality, you might want to ask him, if you go to some of these rallies that they're assembling for him, you might want to show up and ask him some of these questions about Mr. Biden, Mr. Vice President, Senator Biden. What was the deal with your son? Did you help him get that job? How did he get the job? And didn't he personally gain from that? And was that not quid pro quo? So perhaps the citizens out there could be asking questions that the mainstream reporters should have been asking. Those are my thoughts for tonight. Something on my mind. Thanks for being with us.